What's up, guys? Today we're talking about gaming news. So what's going on in the world of gaming? Now, the first one I'm going to hit on is Xbox and a app store. Not just an app, but an app store. You see, in Europe, a act has passed in legislation that forces iOS and Android, who essentially have had a monopoly on their phones, right? That if you have an app, you need an app store from your phone, you either have to go to Google Play or Apple App Store, right? That's really it. That's the only choices you have. However, next year, March of 2024, this act is supposed to go through allowing other companies to put their app store onto iOS and Android devices. So Microsoft is, of course, planning to put that out. Now, if you think about it, this makes a lot of sense between them pushing already to kind of circumvent those app stores, right? You use like a browser, and then you can still stream your games using the xCloud, right? But this will allow them, and others as well, to push their own app store onto mobile devices. In some ways that's good, right? Because Apple and Google both take a huge cut out of the games and apps that you buy on their store. I think it's like 30%, okay? That's a huge cut, especially from like indie or small companies that put stuff on phones. So this could be good in that it breeds competition, and competition is good, right? We want these companies to compete with each other because that provides a better product and a better pricing for us as the consumer. That said, I'm a little concerned because if you think about like PC, you had Steam for a long time, and then other companies didn't want to pay the Steam price, which makes sense. But so then we had like a billion launchers, and then you're kind of in this zone where your whole desktop is just launcher. And that sucks. I don't want that. I'm sure you don't want that. That said, I think that having some of that kind of competing and some of those growing pains, it is worth what the competition will provide in the end result. So we still have a year to see how this goes, but I would be willing to bet that Xbox will be on this day one, and I wouldn't be surprised at all if their competitors have that as well, right? Think Sony, selling PlayStation type games on the mobile. I could totally see that. Epic, of course, is going to do it. Absolutely. I mean, any other Ubisoft, they kind of fallen out of that, but I still wouldn't be surprised. EA, I mean, lots of these companies I could see pushing their own launcher. Now, because it's not just games, it's app store, it might be a little bit less, but I always still expect there to be quite a few players jumping in there and probably some real garbage launchers. So, we'll have to keep an eye out on that. Next up, we're talking physical versus digital game ownership. This topic's kind of tired, isn't it? I mean, this has been an argument for as long as digital games have been coming into play. And the truth is, I understand it. It's frustrating to me because I don't like the idea that a company can just go, nope, that's gone, and you can't get it anymore. That said, that happens with physical games all the time. It's just that there's a secondary market, right? That you can, if you buy it when it sells and they stop selling it, you can sell it to someone else. And that doesn't really happen digitally. But physical games stop getting made. That's always been the case. So it doesn't really surprise me that they would shut down games, especially when you consider they use servers. Anything that's multiplayer. And in this case, we're specifically talking about EA closing Battlefield, whatever, 1943 or whatever that one is, Bad Company 1 and 2. And originally Mirror's Edge was on there, but that has been removed. And so my guess is, while that game is probably not getting delisted, they probably are shutting down the leaderboards because they had to have a server to run that, even though that's a tiny bit of space. But they're still running it. That still costs money. So I would assume that that's what that meant. We'll find out more later. But shutting down servers makes sense. That costs money. And for older games that, maybe a few people play here and there, it just doesn't make business sense. Physical games, especially back in the day, because that's always what we're talking about, is growing up. If you're young in the 90s and the early 2000s, and physical games come out, you buy the game, you play the game, you're done. There wasn't the online component. So that changes things. because adding the online requires servers, requires updates, requires people and money and work poured into that. And so, of course, companies are going to shut that down. That said, you feel like one of the positives of digital games should be that you can make an unlimited number of them. You don't run out of copies, that anyone can get it and you can play it, and you should be able to hold on to it and keep buying it. So the delisting of games troubles me because you want to still have access to that game, right? There's some way to play it, play the solo way or single player version. And by delisting, they just go away. So that's not even an option anymore. I do wonder though, like how many people are going to buy that game? You know, like one of the arguments against this kind of digital game preservation is you get these old games that those of us who grew up with it, absolutely, we love them, and maybe one day we want to go back and buy it. But like how many people in 20 years come back and play a game? I mean, you don't get very many sales. It's not like people are coming back to buy that. So there's a business understanding I think that we have to have, even though it's sucky. But there's some understanding that we need to have that, of course, they wouldn't last forever. That happens with everything that has to get brought up or left behind. And some of that means it's on memories or it's on a digital card or something somewhere, but it's not always available. And there's a reality of that while I, like so many of you probably, buck against that trend. And I dislike the idea of things just disappearing. But there's an element of that I feel like we have to understand is part of not just life, but of a digital marketplace. It's the same in physical marketplace. And how we wrestle with that, I don't know. I mean, we can go check out the completionist who downloaded every single game for the 3DS and the Wii, like that, or Wii U, not Wii U. That's nuts. But that was like 23 grand. Like, no, who has that, you know? I don't have that to just go spend on every single game ever. The reality of games going away is just part of life. I do wish that there's some way, though, that they could just eliminate the online portion and find a way to keep that game of a kind. Even if it's a single version, you know, you replace the online stuff with bots, an AI, even if it's not great, and allow that. Or that people could host their own server, but not have, you know, a whole bank of them. I don't know, some way to work that out. But I do think we need to have a realization about the upkeep cost for companies, and that's why these games get delisted. And maybe instead of fighting them on that we can help them try to find a way to navigate that doesn't completely get rid of the game. Next up, we're talking about Ubisoft, and a very interesting thing that we found, or that was heard, that they're going to use AI to help with NPC dialogue. Now, I saw online, and maybe you did too, maybe you're one of them, I don't know, who were angry. Like, this upset a ton of people. This is a horrible thing. I get that. I do. But let me just put it this way. Game development has massively increased in length over the last decade or two. We went from 2 to 3 year dev cycles to 5 to 7, 8 year cycles. And still sometimes the game's garbage. Think of games like Skyrim. How many guards do you walk by that say, oh, I used to be an adventurer like you and then I took an arrow in the knee, right? Like, what if by using AI, instead of having 100 lines of dialogue that the guards might say and it cycles through so that they all say the same general one, that an AI makes something that makes sense. Now, there is good argument against it in jobs and, you know, the human element, and what if it makes stuff that doesn't make sense, and, you know, all these kind of arguments that I saw. And there's some legitimacy to those arguments. That said, how many people do you think these companies had writing dialogue for NPCs? I mean, the pool is so small that it can't be that much. And with development of games taking so long, I'm sure there's other work for them to do. So I don't see that as being a huge detriment, that it's going to kick all these people out of jobs. Like, devs are in high demand, and they have stuff to work out. Like, I'm not trying to say their, you know, job is easy or perfect. Of course there's stuff to work out there, and I don't know most of that, so I'm not going to get into it. But I don't think that's going to get rid of a whole bunch of jobs. There's so much to do. So if it can help with the lead times on games, that could help. It could help with crunch. They don't have to do all these little minute tasks, because AI could take care of it for them. Maybe you go from 20 people writing to like 2 that just double check and fix anything in the AI that's funky. Like, I feel like there's a good opportunity there for games to improve and for development time to get smaller. That's a good thing, right? We should want that. So I get that it's a hot topic, and I get that there's going to be opinions on either side, and I'm sure there are some that I'm missing or things that I haven't thought of. But I don't think that it's a wholly across the board bad idea or horrible thing. I think there is some opportunity there, and that we should probably have a bit of an open mind. And if there's concerns, that yes, we should address those, but not necessarily with the mindset of we have to shut it down and they can't do this, but maybe then looking at a way to mitigate those concerns so that they can do it in a better way. I know that maybe that's too middle ground for people, but I just think that there is a middle ground. It doesn't always have to be so far apart. You know what I mean? All right, on to something really good. Really, really good. Xbox has Redfall coming out in May. Okay, so that's not very far away. That's coming up here in just, what, a month and a half, 2 months. I mean, it's not far, right? The thing that came out about Redfall that most people were kind of upset about, and rightfully so, is it was going to be always online. I hate that. For any single player game, it should not be required to always be online. We just talked about games getting delisted. Why? Because they're online and they need those servers. And so when you put single player games as online always, then when they decide to take out those servers, those single player games go by the wayside. That's a problem. I don't like that. I think that's wrong. There's no need for that. There's ways to get what you need without requiring online and forcing people into that. Well, the developers are saying they are listening. Now, the quote from the guy, he says, "I can't promise anything, but we hear you." That's really important, right? If they're working on it and they're going to take that out, that's a big deal. Now, he did specifically talk about having, these ideas for why they wanted always online that weren't nefarious, right? The idea was like that they could fix balancing issues, or if there's a constant bug that they didn't catch in QA, that they can go fix it, and they don't have to wait to push this big update. They can just, hop in there, fix it, and it's done. But I still think that the cons of what come down the road is not worth that. Unless we could trust that they would have the online to fix things while it's running, and then when it's done, they pull that out so that the game could continue on as a single player offline experience, which we obviously cannot trust them to do that, then it needs to not always be online. And it does look like they're listening. That's a good move. To be honest, I didn't have really any interest in Redfall, but watching the gameplays, it looks like it's kind of a mix of Borderlands and Far Cry. That's kind of cool. It looks totally different than I was expecting, but it actually sounds interesting. And since it's Xbox, we can just try it on Game Pass. So if you have Game Pass, you just try it out and see. I might actually do that, which is surprising to me because I didn't have any interest based off the initial trailers and talk about the game. So who knows what happened there, but I'm actually kind of looking forward to giving that a shot. All right, next up, we got a couple of games that we're going to talk about getting announced or coming out. And the first one is kind of a big deal, and that is Counter-Strike 2. Now, this is a bit of a mess. It's not as clear-cut as a lot of sequels and games we're talking about, but Counter-Strike and CSGO are some of the biggest games ever. They still have a massive player count, CSGO in particular. I mean, this is a big deal. This game is huge, and this was huge into the first-person shooter market. This was huge in the games market. I mean, this is a big deal. And this new one is essentially they're moving up to a new engine. They're moving into new dynamics and new things in the world. So essentially, it's almost like just a big update, but it's so big that it doesn't make sense to keep it in the same ecosystem. And so it's Counter-Strike 2, well, almost more like a 1.5 it sounds like. But this is a cool thing. This is a big deal for Valve. Valve has turned into basically the Steam pusher, and they don't do a ton of games anymore. But when they do, they hit. Valve doesn't miss. which is kind of crazy in this day and age if you think about it. So I don't know all of the differences they're going to make with Counter-Strike 2. But in the world of gaming, this is about as big of an announcement as you can get. So we'll keep an eye on this one. We'll talk about it when it shows up more. But yeah, keep your ear to the ground on that. It's going to be nuts. All right, next up, we got Miasma Chronicle. Miasma Chronicle got an initial trailer, I think, either last year or maybe the year before. And we didn't see much, right? It was kind of like a first look, but there wasn't gameplay. There wasn't really anything to it. We had no idea what it was like. But now that we know a little more, this is the same team that made Mutant Year Zero. And that is essentially like an XCOM style game, right? Where it's a strategy RPG-esque where you move people. It's a little more free move than tile-based, but you move into cover and you take shots and stuff like that. And that looks to be how this game's going to play. It's got a really cool art style. It's got a cool premise. It's got a little bit of this, I wouldn't necessarily call it cyberpunk, but a little bit of that, like with a robot and like a talking head. I mean, it kind of makes me think of New Vegas, right? Fallout New Vegas. It just gives some of that kind of post-apocalyptic vibe. But what exactly is happening, I still don't know much about it, but it's cool. It's got a cool look, and it got a release date for May 23rd. That's a bummer for them in particular. I wonder if they might push that. May is stacked. They might have some trouble there. But it is a smaller indie game. They might not have the ability to move it. I don't know. But it did get a release date. I'm happy for them. Hopefully it goes well. I do worry, though, in the month it's coming out, that might cause a problem. But we'll see. Next up, a new Persona game. Check this out. Persona 5 Phantom X on cell phones. If you're a cell phone gamer, you're in China or something like that, like, man, this probably just hit. This is awesome. This is good news. But for most of us, this sucks. I love Persona 5. It's probably one of my top games ever. I loved that game. I beat the first initial vanilla version all the way to completion. I started going for the platinum, but it's kind of a nuts platinum, so I stopped. When the Royal Edition came out, I bought that brand new. That one I platinumed. I mean, I love this game. The cell phone game looks cool, but I probably am not going to buy it. I've tried to play games on my phone. I don't think it's a bad marketplace. I think it's a cool idea with the technology in our phones and all that they're capable of. I don't think there's anything wrong with having these kind of cell phone games, big budget cell phone games. I think that's awesome. I just don't like playing on it. That's kind of a bummer. I mean, I don't know how much, if this is just kind of a side story, it's probably not as big of a deal. I don't know if it ties into the original game. I don't know how that works. But just being on cell phone is enough to deter me. I don't know about you. You can let me know in the comments if you feel differently, or maybe you feel the same, but I just can't get down with cell phone games. So, you know, good luck to you, Persona. You're awesome. See you at 6, I guess. All right, last up, we gotta take a look at this. This is Hyper Light Breaker, the sequel to Hyper Light Drifter. Hyper Light Drifter is a super awesome 2D pixel art action game, and it's awesome. If you haven't played it, make sure you go give it a shot. That game is sweet. This game, the sequel, is a huge jump, right? This is coming from that kind of pixel art all the way up to 3D. This is Gearbox. Okay, Gearbox is publishing this. They're not the developer, they're the publisher. But they have some experience in this and taking a game that was smaller and bringing it up to 3D. And this game looks nuts. I'm super stoked about this one. It looks so good. The one interesting thing is there's multiple characters. You can clearly see in the trailer that there's like at least 4 different characters that are in the center of action. Now, whether you get to create a character or there's just different to pick from or different times of the story you play a different character, I don't know. But man, this game looks awesome. I mean, the art style is super cool. The colors really pop off the screen. And with how good Hyper Light Drifter was, I can only imagine that Hyper Light Breaker is going to be top notch. Now, we didn't get a release date as far as I know, but this is one to keep an eye on. All right, well, that's it for me. Obviously, there's a ton more news that come out every week. I don't cover everything, but if you see something good, you hear something good, make sure you send me a DM on Twitter or, you know, hit me up in the comments so I can make sure and get it in the next one. Thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Make sure if you enjoyed the video, you hit that like button. That helps me out a ton. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe, right? That helps out a lot as well. So thanks for watching. Have a good one.